Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning. Good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And oh my gosh, we're going to have so much fun today. We're going to be talking about my favorite subject in the world, close maybe, podcasting, and how it can benefit you and your business so much, how to do it, why to do it, and how to make it easy. So please join me in welcoming Kimberly Spencer to our program today. Welcome, Kimberly. How are you?
I'm doing extraordinary, Deb. I am back from a whirlwind trip in New York where I got to see my book, Make Every Podcast Want You, on the big giant billboards listed as one of the top books of 2024 to change your life and business. So
I love it. I love it. So cool. So cool. Well, let me tell folks about you, and then we'll jump into this. So Kimberly Spencer is an award-winning, high-performance, trauma-informed coach and trainer. As she said, Amazon best-selling author, a TEDx speaker, and the founder of crownyourself.com and Communication Queens, helping visionary leaders transform their self-limiting stories, build their empire, stand out fearlessly, and make the income and impact they deserve. Her book, as she just said, Make Every Podcast Want You, How to Be So Radically Interesting You'll Barely Keep from Interviewing Yourself, just launched and is already a bestseller. So again, Kimberly, welcome.
thank you so much for having me, Deb. I'm so excited to be here and talking to my favorite people on the planet, small business owners.
I love it. I love it. And I always like to know, because you have had quite the journey that you have overcome. Overcoming one or two of the things you have faced would be monumental, but a heck of a thing, my girl, you have had a life. So tell us a little bit more about how it is that you got to where you are today.
Well, I never podcasting. My first guest podcast interview was back in 2016 on the Recovery Warrior podcast. So it was I was sharing about my recovery journey. Mm-hmm. I had met Jessica Flint, the CEO of Recovery Warriors, at a NEDA, National Eating Disorders Association walk in San Diego, and she was like, "Come on my podcast," and I was like, "What's that?"
Yeah. A pod what?
And it was right at the time that I was getting my coaching business off the ground. I'd spent about a year and a half in what I call small business owner productive procrastination, because I had gone through a very challenging business initiation with a buyout process for my e-commerce company, and dealing with lawyers and who don't say the nicest thing when they're not on your side. And now I know it was just to get my price down for the buyout.
Right.
We signed the buyout agreement 3 weeks before I got married. I walked down the aisle and went on my honeymoon and was like, I don't know what to do when I get back home. Thanks for marrying me.
And your husband's name is Spike. I love that.
Yes. I joke that we were born in the same age because he's like 19 years older than me. But in 1987, he was named Spike by a bartender. And ever since then,
he's just a Spike.
Yep. Yeah. And so we actually met in one of my first career iterations, which was a screenwriter. And I had started my Pilates business to support myself as a actor, writer in Hollywood. Fulfilled that dream at 24. My first feature film, Bro, that I co-wrote with the director, Nick Perrotta, came out, was distributed by Lionsgate. Danny Trejo starred in it. Netflix picked it up. It was like, I got to see it in Blockbuster before Blockbuster closed.
When Blockbuster was still Blockbuster. Yeah.
It was like a full circle moment. I always dreamed of seeing a movie that I'd written in Blockbuster, and then I saw it and then it closed. But I met him because of that film, because we met at a networking event where I was promoting it. And So he's been with me through multiple career
Mm-hmm.
iterations, from having a brick and mortar Pilates
Mm-hmm.
studio to screenwriter to e-commerce president,
Mm-hmm.
and then having my starting and growing my coaching company,
Mm-hmm.
Crown Yourself. And then from there, when we landed in Australia in 2020, that was when life happened, and we were those Americans
Right.
who got stuck abroad.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
And
because it
my
was 2020 when the world went kerthud.
Yes, yes. And we were stuck over in Australia, got
Mm-hmm.
to live by the beach for 2 years. Bummer. I know,
Aw,
feel bad.
aw. Mm-hmm.
And but like our income was solely dependent upon me because his
Mm-hmm.
industry completely shut down.
Right, right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, the
And
film industry went nope. Mm-hmm.
yep. Yeah. So, and we were also in Australia. And
Mm-hmm.
so we were there, and I was looking at how do I get new client
Mm-hmm.
generation,
Mm-hmm.
where in the past it had been live events that had generated new clients.
Mm-hmm.
And those were not only weren't happening because of COVID, those weren't happening because of my visa.
Right.
And so I was looking at for ways to find and generate new clients for my coaching
Mm-hmm.
business. I remembered an interview that I'd done in 2019 that had resulted in a $10,000 coaching contract. And I
Ah.
said, let's try guest
Mm-hmm.
podcasting.
Mm-hmm.
So my team and I, we doubled down on that for a month.
Mm-hmm.
We were submitting to 100 podcasts a week,
Mm-hmm.
and like crazy people. And
Mm-hmm.
within just a few short months and 50 interviews, we generated $70,000 of new
Mm-hmm.
business revenue. And I said, I think I'm onto something. Created a course,
Mm-hmm.
ended up
Mm-hmm.
creating a second business. Well, when I had my second child, like you do,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yeah,
went
because you
forth,
didn't have anything else you were doing.
just a few things. Yeah. Yeah. So I tend to birth twins. So I always have a business and a baby at the same
Ah,
time.
that works.
Yeah, my first son was my catalyst for my coaching
Mm-hmm.
business, and then my second son was my catalyst to scale our agency.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll see what this one brings. I think this one's bringing out books
Mm-hmm.
into
Mm-hmm.
the world.
Wait, there's a third on the way?
There is.
Yay, congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you. It was really cool to be in New York and like have I have two boys, but to have like
Mhm.
my daughter inside and just
Yes,
being
to
there
say,
in the
you were
experience.
here when. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And then to come home, and my 7-year-old who's been with me, he literally grew my coaching business
Mm-hmm.
from the ground to a global brand
Mm-hmm.
on my chest.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Like with him lying on my
Mm-hmm.
chest as I'm on my computer as a
Mm-hmm.
newborn, because newborns are easy. When they don't move,
Right. They just sleep. Mm-hmm.
they just sleep, and they
Mm-hmm.
sleep and they eat and they feed. And then
Mm-hmm.
like for me, I was talking to a stay-at-home mom who's a very
Mm-hmm.
dear friend of mine, and she was
Mm-hmm.
like, I was hoping they'd do more. And I was like, they do more when they start moving more.
Yeah. And then you're like, oh my God.
Yeah. Yeah. So to embrace this time now
Yes.
of
Mm-hmm.
like when they're
Mm-hmm.
immobile and you
Mm-hmm.
just put them in one place
Mm-hmm.
and they don't roll
Mm-hmm.
and they just stay there.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yeah, he coming home last night, he said, Mommy, I'm so proud of you. It
Mm-hmm.
like just, and that's
That makes
everything.
it worth it. Mm-hmm.
That's everything. And my TED Talk was on becoming a warrior for possibility because
Mm-hmm.
people are watching your story.
Mm-hmm.
And it was so fun being in New York and having friends of mine who don't have children who are
Mm-hmm.
like, I've never seen anyone pregnant like you. Like where you're in heels, you're going on
Mm-hmm.
podcast interviews, you're doing media spots, and then you like, and I think that that's the power of podcasts,
Mm-hmm.
really, because
Right.
podcasts, storytelling,
Mm-hmm.
even reality TV
Mm-hmm.
and docuseries, those show us a glimpse into life and
Mm-hmm.
to other people's lives that we're
Mm-hmm.
like, oh, I didn't think that was possible, but
Mm-hmm.
now I could do that. I
Right.
was just telling my husband how I'm going to record a podcast for our podcast Crown Yourself, about how Rachel Zoe's reality show inspired me,
Ah. Mm-hmm.
because years ago I was watching her in her reality show that she had
Mm-hmm.
like on Bravo. I was a huge Bravo addict like about a
Mm-hmm.
decade ago. And she was in heels doing fashion week or
Mm-hmm.
something, pregnant. And I was like, I want to do that when I'm
Right.
pregnant. Like
Right.
that's the type of
Mm-hmm.
pregnancy that I
Mm-hmm.
love to have.
Mm-hmm.
Like one that, like, I don't build nurseries, I
Mm-hmm.
build businesses
Mm-hmm. Right.
during my
It's such a
nesting
great
phase.
example. And I mean, other people are gonna
Yeah.
and that's
Yeah.
perfectly fine also. I think the important thing is to do you.
Yes. And that both in business and in life and
Mm-hmm.
in motherhood or
Mm-hmm.
parenthood, I
Right.
think you have to know how you do your business
Mm-hmm.
best.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not for everyone,
Right.
but when you find something that really works for
Mm-hmm.
you, double down on that.
Mm-hmm.
especially if you're seeing an ROI, especially if you're seeing results,
mm-hmm,
and especially most importantly, if it's lighting your soul on fire.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I love it. I love it. You know, and of course the thing about podcasting is you're reaching hundreds, thousands, hundreds of thousands of people sitting in your chair. You know, and to me that's one of the coolest things about it.
Yeah, it makes it so easy because also like most people when they see me, like they see how I dress, they see that I'm like, I love colors, I love sparkles, I love glitter, but I'm naturally introverted. Like I love my me time, my alone time. I very rarely get it as a mother of two under 7, but that alone time is so sacred. And so I do far better speaking either one-on-one or I have to ramp myself up if I'm doing like a speaking gig. Because I've done some pretty big speaking gigs, but like that's a moment of like internal and external preparation. And podcasts, I'm like, I get to go on and just have like a personal, intimate conversation that's not small talk.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
so
I mean, you get a little
life-giving.
stuff in there that's small talk because we want to know about you.
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, it's and I love how technology has changed. You know, when I started, I actually, you know, now I've done over 1,000 of these. Been doing this for a very long time. Actually did it before it was called a podcast. You know, and I trotted my little self down to a radio station in Denver. My guests came in. It was great fun. And then I moved. You know, and it was like, oh, and the station said, oh my gosh, you were one of our more popular programs. Let's do this on Skype. Okay. So I was their first program on Monday morning on Skype live. As you can imagine, that worked 99% of the time. And when technology failed, it failed spectacularly, right?
Oh, yes.
I would get text messages saying dead air, you know, and I'm like, you know, and then we hit upon, oh my God, let's pre-record. And of course, the cool thing about pre-recording is now my guests can be anywhere in the world. You know, and so that works. And you know, if technology fails, well, you just pick it up where we left off. But then Zoom came along. And the fact that I can now see my guests and have our little virtual cocktail, cup of coffee, whatever it is that we're having, it really does make it such a fun way to have this conversation.
Yeah. And it allows you to have a deep personal conversation where also as a business owner, you're positioned as an expert.
Right.
Like you have someone advocating for you. And I've talked to a lot of podcasters who have turned down some very big names for their show simply because they're like, as big as their audience is, they don't resonate with my audience.
Oh.
And they don't resonate either with our philosophy or our values. And even though they have a big podcast, they're still turning these people down simply because of the lack of values integrity. And I think that's a huge piece because when you go on somebody else's show, they're advocating by just sheer proximity alone.
Right.
And that's a huge honor and deserves respect. And I think a lot of times when people start out podcasting and especially guest podcasting and they're going on other people's podcasts and they're like, oh, I want to be visible. Like it's a nice like ego boost to like get validation that like, oh, I know what I'm talking about. People want to hear what I have to say. But at the same time, we have to recognize that the podcaster has the hardest job of all. They're not only doing all the editing and all the program management, they're also the one who has built the audience and they have spent
it's
the time.
Our reputation on the line.
Yes. And if you don't deliver the goods as a guest and you show up and it's ego and pride and here's the highlight reel of my life that you could see on Instagram, but I'm not going to get vulnerable and tell you about the deep parts or the failures or the challenges that I've had, then those interviews I've heard time and time again, podcasters just saying, wow, that just kind of fell flat. It was just, it's because people want to hear the whole journey. And I mean, the stats don't lie when it comes to podcasting. Like they're all in the first chapter of my book of like most podcast listeners will listen for 20 minutes of time, like to a new show. They are 42% of millennials report purchasing from what the host recommends.
Oh my gosh.
Books, supplements, sponsorships, you name it. That's like, it trumps the social media metrics for
Right.
education and affluence in terms of demographics.
Right.
So if you want as a business owner to hit an audience and that is affluent, educated, purchasing, and will tune in for 20 minutes versus the 1.7 seconds on an Instagram reel, podcasting and guest podcasting is the way to go.
Right.
But you also have to know how to share your story, how to share about what it is that you do, how to get vulnerable and real fast.
Right. Even on something like, say this, a business podcast.
Yeah.
And I tell people it's my podcast. I can do what I want with it. And so I've interviewed some folks that aren't always totally business related. I mean, we try and bring business back in a way, but I've interviewed two women who built their businesses based on the fact that they were abused as children. One in the middle, she tells me, she said, don't Google my name because you won't want to see the images that come up. And I'm like, I'd change my name. But you're right. But and I mean, one woman, she starting at age 4, her dad sexually abused her. And she actually stayed until she graduated from high school, started her business, which at that point was called Monster Golf. It was a chain of indoor putt-putt golf. I mean, coolest story. But she called it Monster Golf because she called her dad the monster. And this was her way of basically flipping him off. Right? And I mean, you got to love a story like that. And so and now she runs the Kiss Museum for Gene Simmons in Las Vegas. I mean, you talk about a very diverse woman, but it is about telling those stories. Now her story, and I read her book, it was actually okay. I mean, all she would say was the monster came into the room because you didn't need the details. You didn't want the details. I mean, that was not, but I talked to another young woman, the one who said, don't Google my pictures. And she went into a little bit more detail. I mean, nothing that, but she talked about sex trafficking. She had been sold by her parents when she was 16. Can you imagine? But part of what we talked about was how, as a business and a business person, you can help stop things like that. And one of her points was women are far more intuitive on things like that. And we're going to look at an adult and a teenage-ish, and we're going to know if there's something wrong. And and she said, and we as business people are in restaurants far more. We are in hotels, we are in airports, and and so it was just a very interesting thing to bring back into how is this talking about business. But yeah, it's as you said, it's how do we tell those personal stories? And some of them are absolutely hilarious, right? The kids that say, or the people who say, yeah, I was an entrepreneur starting at 6. She said,
that was me.
This one, she wanted to raise, or she was actually a teenager and she wanted to raise money. And, because she was going to be on the dance team at school, couldn't afford this stuff. So what does she do? She has a garage sale. Her mom came home. There's no microwave. There's no, and mom made her go get everything back. But she said that was her first foray into entrepreneurship. And she said she learned she needed to ask, right? Mom said, okay, if it was her stuff, she could keep the money from it. But no, she needed the microwave back. And so, yeah, I mean, it's just all those stories. And you talk about it in your book. We want to hear those stories because it makes us relate to people.
Yeah. And I mean, I was on a great podcast with my friend Hillary Russo of Holistically Speaking, and she was like, yeah, was not expecting a story of sexual assault in a podcasting book.
Right.
And I'm very transparent about my history. And in fact, I share that story simply because that $10,000 client that I had generated from that podcast interview, it was a business podcast. And I was talking about how one of the core values, like the core value of my Crown Yourself coaching company, is ownership, and it's radical ownership. And I shared about my story from 2018, where I had the realization that back in 2012, I was raped. And it wasn't the Hollywood scene, and thus it had caused me to question, like, did this really happen?
Right.
Like, is what it is? And I actually like woke up in a night sweat, like with the full memory. And I had to Google the definition. And then once I
Right.
Googled it, I was like, oh my God, I was, because I never wanted to claim something that I
Right.
wasn't.
And your
Because
brain protected you.
yeah, yeah, and that's the power of the brain. And I was sharing this story on the podcast, and I was sharing about radical ownership and taking, like, I had to take ownership, like the experience. I looked at, wow, what caused me to put myself in such a position that I would be in that space, where I'd be at the party, where I'd be drunk,
Right.
where I would let my friends leave without me, where I would like, what caused me in that space? And I looked back at my life and that the circumstances around 2012 prior to, and I had just gotten divorced, and which was like something I never thought I would be. I had left the Navy man that I'd eloped with when I was 22 and young, dumb, and stupid, and like madly and violently in love in a way.
With someone in uniform.
With
Duh.
I mean, the uniform sold it. But and then, he deployed, and then we couldn't get along. And so, but we couldn't get along when he was on the other side of the world. And I was like, well, how are we going to live in the same house together? But getting like the stigma of divorce, like I felt so unworthy. I felt like I deserved to be punished, because that's how I grew up, is that you stay with the person that you're married with for forever. Because I watched my parents literally go through everything that you could imagine. With their marriage, and my parents stayed married until my father passed in 2021. And that experience, though, it caused me, shifted my subconscious identity, and I had to take ownership that, wow, I had this belief system, or as what I call it, BS, that
Yeah, because sometimes it is BS.
Sometimes it is BS. The stories that we tell ourselves are regularly not true, and usually exaggerated in our own belief systems. And that was one of them. And that it was a belief system that I deserved to be punished. And I put myself in very dangerous positions for about 6 months, that caused me to put myself in this position specifically. And I shared that on a podcast, and the podcaster loved my take on ownership so much. He wanted to work with me as his coach.
Oh my
And
gosh.
he's like and that was because I was vulnerable, and I shared about that experience. And I shared it from the perspective of like, I've healed this trauma. Like, I don't think that doesn't absolve the person who did that.
Right. Oh, yes.
Their responsibility.
It absolves you, though.
It absolves me, and it allows me to not take it into my present. And I get to take ownership in my learning lessons and my gifts from that experience, and say, wow, as sucky as that was, I learned something so powerful that I have, like, I never want to believe that's like, to think that, like, even now as a mom, like, to think like, wow, that somebody could ever believe they deserve to be punished. Like,
but we do.
I know. And like, that's a common belief system that I've seen with entrepreneurs. And that's what creates a lot of self-sabotage in people's businesses.
I don't deserve to be successful.
Yeah. Yeah. And so facing that belief system, or that BS, allowed me to grow my business and like scale it 300% in 2020.
Right.
And then I shared the story again on another podcast interview. And I shared about how it wasn't the Hollywood, drag me down the alley sort of experience. It was a very, it was a very simple experience, but like, I had said no, he didn't listen. I had said no again, he still didn't listen. I had said no, and he finally stopped when I elbowed him in the gut. But that experience, by being able to share that on a podcast, the podcaster, she actually looked at me. She goes, wow, I guess you could say I was too. And that's the power of our stories, is that helped her unlock another level of healing for herself, because another BS belief system that a lot of people run into is, I haven't had it bad enough, so I don't need to share it.
Right. Yeah. I've had a good life.
I've had a good life. Like,
good stories are good to share, though, too, like we were saying.
Yeah. And like, even, and I've seen trauma victims like experience this, especially those who've experienced childhood trauma. Oh, it only happened one time.
Right. Or it wasn't that bad.
It wasn't that bad. I'm like, it still happened.
Yes.
Like, we have to acknowledge the fact that that ownership comes from not absolving the other person of responsibility. It comes from you accepting that happened and that sucked. Like that sucked and that's okay. And it's okay. And like, whether it's a business experience, a personal experience, it's taking ownership of the fact that that those negative experiences happened. They brought up and created negative belief systems, negative emotions in your body, negative experiences, and it sucked. And that's okay.
Right.
It's okay that it sucked. But we have to acknowledge that it happened, and we can't dissuade, oh, somebody's had it worse than me.
Right.
And so thus I don't deserve to share about it, because how many other people are in the same spot as you who it wasn't bad enough. So they are hiding their story, which really it's just a mask of shame.
Right.
And shame loves secrets. And so, oh, that just absolves us. We don't have, we just get to abdicate our ownership of it. We don't have to actually share about it. And I'm not saying that you have to share about everything that's happened in your life or business on a podcast interview, for sure. Like I definitely touch on in the book boundaries. Like there are certain things about my childhood that I didn't share until my father had passed. Cause I like, as much as he said that I like, once he got sober, in 2016, after I staged his intervention, there were many things that he was like, I want you to share this. And I said, look, Dad, I said, I love that you are so open and that you want me to share this. I said, I would actually like you to share it. But I don't feel like you're at this space yet with your recovery and your healing.
Right.
But
and you didn't want other people judging him.
Yeah. I didn't want him to have that perception, because there are perceptions and titles that people will give that a lot of people think are unforgivable.
Right.
And I've gotten into such a place of forgiveness with my father and like wholeness and completion, especially after he's passed. And he's been like a guiding light from the other side, that I'm like, we had some very human abusive experiences together. And I look back on that time that was the worst in my childhood, and I look at, wow, I had the tools to deal with a relationship of a parent passing that was a complex relationship.
Oh, and yeah, I had one of those.
Yeah. Unfortunately, my dad didn't have the tools, and his only tool in his toolbox was alcohol.
Right.
And so when both his parents passed, who had a very complex relationship with both of them, that tool that he pulled out was not the most useful one. And it was more like a hatchet that was just hatcheting at everything.
Right.
But that being able to have the compassion for that. And not everybody has reached that space in forgiveness.
Right.
There were certain things that I wouldn't share. There's also things that I don't share about my kids, because I'm like,
right.
It's not for the world to know. And I also don't want to put those perceptions out of my children when they don't have the ability to consent. And I'm like really careful with what I'm putting out about, like, I'm not like, one time I did share, of course, my experience on a podcast of eating shit, because that was accidental. I accidentally ate my son's poop. I did not mean to.
Ew.
It was disgusting. I know. It was so gross. It was so gross. I thought it was fig butter on his hands. It was not. But I shared about that experience, and then I shared the learning experience from that of like,
right.
Man, nothing takes out that taste. There is nothing. You can't Listerine that away. Like
there's not enough, Listerine.
The only thing that I could do was I had to get back to the table and I had to eat something.
Yes.
And I was like, what a metaphor for business.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
Like you gotta get back to the table.
Something goes really wrong. Well, then fix it and go on.
Yeah. Yeah. Then you gotta go back to the table and pick up another bite of something.
Yeah.
Yeah. You
and it had to be a big bite.
anything that that was palpable and not fig butter. Yeah.
And the thing is, we all learn, or we should be learning from what has gone wrong and what has gone right. And as you said, we can't ignore it. And I think in many cases, it has made us, a much more powerful business person. My mother passed in March, and we had one of those complex relationships. It was just very interesting, right? And I never felt that she approved or understood or anything of anything that I did. It was never good enough. And she would tell me that. I mean, she just would flat out say, why are you doing this? But after she passed, all these people told me how proud she was of me. And I'm like, why couldn't she tell me that? Right. But a big part of what I kept doing was I'm going to show her that I can be what I want to be and I don't have to do what she thinks I should do. But yeah, I mean, the healing process is very cathartic. I told, actually I told her sister, I said, she was broken. We don't know why she was broken or who broke her. We didn't break her, but we also couldn't fix it. So then we had to determine how we were going to go on with it. And, and I think it's that way with everybody. We all have our little quirks, our little things, and some of them are true physical and emotional things. I mean, and things like that. But it's how do we go on from there, and how do we become whatever it is that we're supposed to be.
And I think that's where listening to other people's stories is so powerful, and watching and seeing other stories of possibility, because then we realize, because the most dangerous place to be in any space in your life and business is, oh, they don't understand me. Like, because then you put yourself into a cage of one and you're in your own prison where no one can understand what you're feeling. And I'm like, no, sweetheart, like feelings are the common language of humanity. We like, no matter what circumstances you've experienced, yours have probably been different than mine, but we've all experienced grief, shame, guilt, anger, frustration. We've all had the same spectrum of emotions. And if we can connect on that level instead of on the specificity of, oh, well, you didn't have this happen to you, then that's how we're able to evolve as humans, of saying, wow, I never had that happen, but I understand, I have compassion for your grief, because I have had grief in my own way.
Right. And that's where, of course, podcasting is so cool about this, because we are able to have those conversations pretty much on a one-on-one level. We're not thinking about how many people are listening or all of those. And even if we're doing things live, it's still this very personal connection. And you do talk about that in your book. And I love that it's called How to Be So the subtitle is How to Be So Radically Interesting You Barely Keep from Interviewing Yourself. But that is kind of, I mean, we have to know our own story. How are we going to deal with it? How are we going to tell it? And you've got some very practical tips in your book that are very cool. But let's go to the basic. Why should somebody want to go be a guest on somebody else's podcast?
Well, you mentioned it earlier, Deb, like that you and I are both big fans of the power of drafting. And it's a concept that I addressed early on in the book. I think it's literally chapter 1, where it's a concept in racing, where you'll see it in bike racing, motorcycle racing, car racing. I learned about it from watching Cars 3 ad infinitum for like 6 months.
Geese draft.
Yeah, where you have the leader, where they are pulling they're expending the energy to be in the lead. Then you have the person who's right up behind them, and they are able to pull on the velocity of what's
it's kind of like they're being sucked along.
Yeah, so you don't have to expend as much energy working so hard. And if you think about it, like when you go on a podcast, like what I said earlier, is you're getting positioned by the experts. So if you think about doing a webinar for your business, and you're going on and you have to prove your results, you have to prove, oh, I did this with this company, or I was able to help my clients achieve this, and this results. And meanwhile, the audience is going, well, really? I'm new. I don't know. Really? Did she really do that? That's awesome. Good for her. I don't know. Will it work for me? But meanwhile, with a podcast, you have a podcaster who's positioned, I mean, like you, Deb, like 1,000 episodes. You're just the pro. And so you have an audience who has a built-in trust, who's listening to you because they like you. They know, like, and trust you already. And thus, when you introduce me or any of your other guests, I don't have to prove, because I've got Deb's personal backing just by being on this show. So I get to draft as a guest on the host experience, trust that they've already built with the audience. That's why I say, like, when you pitch to podcasts, know that you are like, it's like you are asking it's like you're trying to date the trust fund's daughter.
Okay.
Like the audience is your trust fund as a
Mm-hmm.
podcaster
Mm-hmm.
because you've built that trust.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I get pitches, because I've had a top 2% podcast with Crown
Mm-hmm.
Yourself, and our Communication Queens podcast has been in and out of the top 100 best marketing
Mm-hmm.
podcasts in the US. But that, like, when I get pitches for those podcasts, I'm like, did you address me by name?
Mm-hmm.
First and foremost, like, did you
by the right name? Oh my
by the right
gosh.
name?
When I get a pitch and it's the wrong name, I'm like, seriously?
Or like, dear madam, I'm like, come on,
No.
we're not in the
This is
18th
not
century.
Victorian. Yeah.
And being able to just recognize, like, okay, if I'm rolling up to the trust fund daughter's house and I'm going to meet the dad who's the head of the trust, I'm not going to be like, listen, here's all the things that you're going to do for me. And here's all the things here's a couple things that I might bring to the table for you, but let's get this booked and let me marry your daughter.
Right. No.
If I was the father, I'd be like, hell no, no way, get away. So being able to recognize that you are entering into a relationship that is already pre-established with trust.
Right.
And there is a reference that needs to be had for that. So when you pitch, sharing that you acknowledge the audience size, the time that they've put in, thousands of episodes, you know, even if it's just hundreds, even if they make it past 50 episodes, that
Right. If
automatically
you make
puts
it
the
past
podcast.
30, it's like
Yeah,
major.
that they're in the top 95% of active podcasts. Like if they've made it past 30 episodes, that's a huge deal. So just being able to acknowledge those steps of resolve, of resilience, of building that audience, that's a huge piece that goes into podcasting, because then what you want to focus on is building the relationship. Because, I mean, every business book out there has said, you know, the 5 people that you surround yourself with are the most important. And so if you think about a podcaster is constantly up-leveling their circle. A podcaster is constantly talking to new people. They can be one of your greatest sources of referrals and leads.
Oh, yeah.
If you just build a relationship. The problem is, and I don't know who teaches this, I want to find them and like have a chat, but there a lot of people treat like the podcast interview as a transactional relationship where they see, oh, I'm going on a podcast. This means I'm having a conversation. It's kind of like a discovery call, which means maybe I can close the podcaster as a client. And I'm like, no, please don't do that.
Yeah.
Not unless they ask. Like I will say for that one client that I generated, it was the podcast host back in 2019. But the podcast host inquired about my
that was not
services
your goal.
directly. That was not my goal, nor was that the goal of the podcast. And I think if you go on with that intention of this is the podcast, and I've seen this on the podcaster side too. I mean, we have at our agency, we have a hard pass dungeon list where we lock a podcaster in the dungeon if they hard pitch our clients.
Right. Oh, yeah.
It's like, oh, you shared vulnerably about this story and this story and this story. I'm like, that's called manipulation. And as someone who's a trauma-informed coach, like if you're manipulating my clients into a sale, we're not gonna do that. So that is something where we want to be aware of the relationship that we're developing and looking at relationships as being transformational instead of transactional. Because when you think of them in transactional, you get 2x linear growth. When you think of them as being transformational and how can I support you? How can I give? How can I encourage you? How can I contribute to your success or the success of your show? Is there any resource that I can give you that could help? All of these things allow for you to build a relationship, and no one personally or professionally wants to be in a relationship with a taker. We all have been there.
Right.
Where you know the person who's stabbing you with their business card, who's like, do you mind if I just back you into a corner and take an hour of your time?
How many people can you introduce me to?
Yeah, and who can you're like, I don't know you. I don't know who you are. I don't know what you sell, or like I don't know. I haven't built a trust and rapport with you. But after a podcast interview, you're spending, you already have an hour, 30 minutes, depending upon how long the interview is. But with Deb, if you get on the business power
it's an hour.
hour,
Yes,
it's
the
an hour.
business power hour.
And so there's an hour of like a deep conversation that we get to have,
right.
that there's rapport there.
Mm-hmm.
And not every podcaster you're going to want to continue to
Mm-hmm.
do business with, but there will be some that you're going to be like, damn, that was a great conversation.
Oh, yeah.
would
I mean,
love to
I
continue.
have guests from 10 years ago who I am still in contact with.
See
Mm-hmm.
that?
Yep.
Like that is the power of the
Mm-hmm.
podcast, because it's just building relationships. And when you can start to see
Mm-hmm.
people as your most valuable
Mm-hmm.
resource in your business,
Right.
everything changes.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. You know, and it's all about kind of that networking and that connectivity. I had one just a couple weeks ago that is, you know, an absolute perfect example of this. Gina Schreck, who when I lived in Denver, I knew her because we were in the PR world, you know, and we had a
I
great
know
time.
Gina.
Yeah, she is just one of the most fabulous people in the world, right? And so, you know, she and I have stayed connected all this time. I mean, I know about the Shreklets, you know, all of these various things. And then she posts on Facebook that she had started a new business. And somewhere I had missed this. I had totally missed that she was doing something very different. And she wrote a book about it, right? You know, and so I, of course, reach out and I'm like, oh my God, Gina, I have to get you back on the podcast right away. And so she has started one of the businesses where it's a work from home space and it has meeting event space, right? And so all of this stuff, she and I, of course, had this absolute fabulous conversation. And then a couple of weeks ago, I'm talking to somebody about what I do with Trying Not to Die.live. I'm maybe going to be a speaker for her back in Denver. And she said, I've been having trouble finding a meeting space. And I went, ding, 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 ding. Right now, I don't know, you know, so I did the introduction. Don't know if it worked out or anything like that. But it is, you know, it's all of those things. And it's kind of networking on steroids in a lot of ways, because, you know, I've even had people who have reached out to me and said, you had guest X on, and would you mind introducing me to them? Because and you know, if they give me a good enough reason, sure, because again, it's my reputation on the line. And so yeah, it's about that. And you know, but you know, I love the whole drafting concept and the fact that, you know, and I call it guilt by association, right? But it's, you know, how do we make those connections? And I get now, you know, I've been doing this a really long time. And so I get probably 5 pitches a day, you know, and they get the standard, thank you very much. You know, and Kim, my producer, puts them on a list. And, you know, we may or may not get back to them. I mean, it's just kind of one of those things. But I look at the pitches, and if it interests me, then when I send it to Kim, I say, this one goes higher on the list, or get this one in right away, or, you know, whatever it is. And it's all about that relationship. It's what are they saying? I mean, you know, when I can tell that somebody has a new book and they're sending out, whether it's them or an agency, 10, 20 a day. So, right. They didn't call me by first name. They didn't refer to my podcast, right? If it's just, we think they'd make a great guest on your podcast. How hard is it to have gone in and pasted the Business Power Hour? Right?
It's literally like commandment number 1 in my 10 pitch commandments of like, just use their first name and the name of their show.
Right.
Like that is that bare minimum.
Yeah. I mean, I don't always care if they have said, I loved guest X when they talked about X. Now, it is great. I mean, and I know they probably listened to one podcast, 10 minutes worth, right? I'm not stupid, you know, but when that puts them up a little bit higher on the list though, right? Because then I know they did go to my podcast. They didn't just find it on a list of business podcasts and are just sending out the blind pitches. You know, and we have turned people away, not terribly often, you know, and I've been turned down just twice when I've reached out to people. And that was, you know, that was very interesting. I had one who said, I can't talk for 45 minutes. or no, I can't talk for an hour because business power hour, duh. And I said, really? I just heard you give a 45-minute presentation. I said, and it's my job as the host to get enough material, to have done my research, to do all these things to make sure that it's going to last an hour. And there are a couple more pushbacks. I finally thought he doesn't want to do it. And that was fine. He just didn't want to do it. And then I had another one where I went to somebody, big name person, right? And I said, I would love to have you on my podcast. Now, I've done that with other really big name people, and I've been very honored and very blessed when they have said, yes, we would be delighted. This guy said, sure, here's the contact information for my assistant. She'll set it up. Doodly doodly do. I type it all out. I said, hey, he told me contact you. And her response was, you're going to die. He was being polite. Don't contact him again. And I thought, does he know she's doing this? Or, or is this really their process? And so I dropped it. I thought, I'm not going to tattle. I'm not going to do anything. But he came to me and said, I want to be a guest. And I turned him down. I mean, and that was petty. That was spiteful. But
people remember the way that you treat them.
Oh, yeah.
I mean,
yeah.
Like I look at when I'm in a business meeting, I look at how someone's treating the server.
Mm-hmm.
Like
right. Did they say thank you? Did they say please? Did they, just gimme? Right.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Mm-hmm. How is someone treating my team? How is someone treating my clients? Like that's why when I find out, because we have, for our agency, we have a feedback form, and I recommend this for whether you work with an agency or not.
Right.
Like this is a great way to collect testimonials. It's how we collect testimonials for our clients, but it's also a great way to see, okay, did I get an ROI from this podcast? Whether it's in the ROI that comes from a relationship that's being built, or like possible business referrals could be cross-referenced, or JV partnership. Like there's many ways that you can see an ROI that may not be a tangible, like this podcast made me 50 sales. Like you can sometimes, especially if it's a book, especially if downloads, emails, subscriptions, podcast downloads, etc. You can start to see that result once the podcast distributed. But we see our clients getting referrals and clients even before podcasts distribute, simply because they're building the relationship. Right. And when I find out that a podcaster has like hard sold or not treated my client with respect, or discounted their opinion, like that's where I'm like, dungeon, put them in the dungeon. They're going to stay there. We're not going to submit any more clients to them, because I don't want to put our reputation or our any other clients through something that would make them feel really uncomfortable or not supported in their mission and what they're saying.
Right. And we've got the dungeon, and we've also got what's the highest point? Turret? I don't know. Where, I know if, say, we've got a hole in the schedule or a last minute cancellation or something, I can go to them and say, I need a guest, and I need a guest within 24 hours. And they're going to give me a phenomenal guest, not the next person on their list. But yeah, we've put agencies in the dungeon. I had one now, been doing this so long that we have a pretty set process down. When someone is accepted as a guest, we let them know. And then at some point, and sometimes, it's far enough in advance that, they might not be getting something right away, but they will get a form and you got it. And it's fill this out. We make it simple. We make it easy. We need your bio. We need your talking points. We need your picture. We need yada, yada, yada. And this agency's response was, it's your job to do the homework.
Oh, wow.
I was like, excuse me? Now, if someone has a book, I try really, really, really hard to read the book, because how are we going to talk about the book if I haven't read it, right? Yeah. And so I know I might not read word for word, but I skim it. I look for high points, all of those various things. And so, but yeah, I mean, she gave me his bio, but then said, here's his website, do the research yourself. And I mean, literally, that is what she said. And so, but he looked very interesting, and I was still interested in him. So I went ahead, did the interview. And, and he and I were having an after chat. And I said, by the way, are you getting the success with scheduling that you thought you would? Because it was fairly new. And he said, I'm not. And I said, I'm going to tell you why.
Yeah.
And then danged if I didn't get a phone call from her because he called and fired her. And I told her, I said, I should, now, first of all, I should never have to ask 3 times. Sometimes I have to ask twice because stuff goes in spam filters and all sorts of things. And I have had people who have said, well, I sent it to you. Well, I'm sorry. It's gotten lost in the shuffle. Please send it to me again. I mean, I will fall on that sword because that does happen, right? But I should never have to ask for a third time. And I told her that. I said, yeah, it's my job to do a lot of the research, but I'm not going to start from scratch because I have a very busy life. When I ask you for 5 key speaking points, you should have those. You should be cutting and pasting them from your other stuff. I mean, this was not a hard thing. And that's one of the things that I always get a kick out of is when the guests don't follow my instructions. They're pretty simple. And whether it's the guest or whether it's their agency. And I'm an agency myself. I get it. I understand. But follow my instructions. It's pretty simple. And I love in your book you talk about promptness and all of those things. Emergencies happen. All of those things. I mean, I as the host try to log into Zoom 10 minutes early, at least 5 minutes early, because you never know when Zoom is going to go, oh, must update your software. Right. You're like, but yeah, I mean, there's just so many things to do. But I love being a guest on other people's programs. Very entertaining to see how they set stuff up, and we steal stuff. I'm like, oh, I like how they did that. And all these things. But it is, back to what we were saying, it is such a great way to get your story and your message out there.
Yeah. And I like to think of it like you're coming to somebody else's house. Right. So you're coming into somebody else's house and you're not like, hey, you need to rearrange this furniture for me.
I don't like that.
Like, I don't like that there. Like, that's rude. So we want to be respectful when we're going into someone's house. Same is true as like, when you have emergencies come up, because I understand emergencies come up, but a lot of times I got to be honest, because I've been coaching small business owners for 9 years now. Like a lot of times emergencies are lack of SOPs. Like you just don't have the SOPs in place. You don't have the team in place. And thus you are putting yourself in a self-sabotaging position where you're constantly fighting fires. So if you like, for the most part, like at least as a mom of a 7-year-old and a 3-year-old boy,
things happen.
And I say, if it's bleeding or if it's on fire, or if it's like dead,
then we'll stop.
Then we need to stop and like actually have an emergency. But otherwise, like many things that are considered urgent can actually be done within 24 hours, within 48 hours, like within a reasonable amount of time. So anything, like very rarely do I have, like there was one podcast that I had that we scheduled once in Australia. And I said, okay, well, she canceled last minute. I said, okay, well, that's fine. Like we always have a 2-strike policy where I will give someone the benefit of the doubt. Stuff happens. And you never
even
know.
If they say, I forgot. You know what? That's okay. That's a lot to fess up to, because they could have come up with all sorts of other excuses. And to be honest and say, I forgot. Okay.
And like sometimes things get lost on the schedule or some calendar doesn't translate and like stuff happens. And so I think if we give each other as business owners a little bit of grace, I used to be very hard-nosed about this as a coach, because I was like, how you do anything is how you do everything. And then I went to a training summit back in 2018. And this was right before we started like really scaling and growing. And I honestly think it's because of this, because we started giving people some grace. And I had a top sales coach say, you will attract far more prospects with honey than you do with vinegar. And just giving someone the grace of saying, wow, are you okay? Like, I see that you're 5 minutes late. Is everything okay? Like instead of being like, you're wasting my time. And I've seen podcasters and I've polled podcasters. Like there are some that have very hard, fast lines that I'm like, we all do boundaries different. So it's important to recognize when you're going into someone's house, like what somebody else's boundaries are. Like If you notice shoes are on the like to the side of the door,
Right.
probably take your shoes off when you're coming into someone's house.
Right.
The same is true with a podcast. Like if you notice a form, complete the form. Like
Right.
do some basic things to make sure that you're respecting the house rules. So when you look at an urgency, one of the things that I've seen single moms do amazing that I share in the book is like pre-framing. So let's say, for example, especially as a mom, things happen, kids get sick. If let's say you're about to go on a podcast the day, you have a podcast the day before, just look at your schedule, like simple high performance habit. Look at your schedule the day before. Okay, what do I have? I have 3 podcast interviews. Okay. What else do I have going on in my life that could interfere with this happening? Oh, well, my son came home with a cough, sniffles, slight fever. Okay, awesome. Let me just pre-frame, hey, this is happening in my life, just in case my child needs more of my attention than I'm able to, so that I can give him that attention if he's sick. That's something that is skilled communicators do and skilled professionals and business owners do. Just giving a little bit of reflection and time. It does not take a lot of time.
Right.
But just have a think through of a couple different questions throughout the day. And this is just high performance principles. Look at what's on the schedule for tomorrow. What could interfere with any of those things happening? And if so, can I send an email? Can I send something in advance so that the podcaster is aware of this potential problem rather than, oh my gosh, everything's on fire. I'm emailing 5 minutes before the show and suddenly I cancel. And then you leave a bad taste in the podcaster's mouth. Versus if we can start pre-framing and preempting communication a bit, it diminishes the amount of urgency and that we have in our business, which helps us be better business owners because we have less stress. And we will find people are much more understanding when you can preempt them to, hey, this is happening. Just wanted to give you a heads up.
Right. And I, as the podcaster, appreciate that so much because one of the things that I'm going to respond with is, would it be better for you to just reschedule? Right. And even if it's like, oh my God, I have your scheduled to go live tomorrow. It's a podcast. The world will not come to an end if it doesn't get on that, and we do try and have, several in advance. I mean, like we're recording this almost a month before it goes live. And so, if things change, well, then I've got some that I can kind of rearrange the schedule with. There are times where it's like, nope, we're not going to have a Thursday show. Okay, that's the world didn't come to an end. And so it comes back to treating people with respect, and honoring their time. And I'm going to segue and say, oh my gosh, we're at the top of the hour because I'm respecting your time, right? But more importantly, we just scratched the surface on this because I would like to have almost like a little mini, here's what to do type of things. And so, I definitely want to have you on again. But until then, we said, crown yourself and communication queens. How do people find you and what are the services that you provide?
So with Crown Yourself, we have high performance business coaching one-on-one for leaders. If you're in any C-suite space, director space, those are the people that we work with who are looking to expand their brand into a powerful platform. And so that's our specialty with Crown Yourself, is helping you build a holistic and build an empire holistically so that you're doing it with having a family, with having your other relationships and roles as well, and showing up in the leader in all those spaces. And so if you want more information, you can head on over to crownyourself.com. You can also listen to the Crown Yourself podcast. Go to crownyourself.com/podcast. Our Communication Queens agency, we are accepting clients. Most of our clients
so reasonably priced. Oh my gosh.
Thank you. Yeah. We wanted to make it doable and have packages for those who want to test out getting on podcasts, see the ROI that's possible. And our packages range depending upon how many podcasts you want to be on. So 10 to 60 a year. So you can blow up the podcast sphere, or you can just test it out as a strategy for your business to see how it's generating leads and revenue. And so that you can, and if you want to learn more about how to guest on podcasts, how to be an amazing guest on podcasts, how to communicate with ease, you can listen to the Communication Queen podcast. at communicationqueens.com/podcast. And then to get the book, if you want to have every podcast begging to have you on and loving your pitches, feeling so seen and heard, and where they are like, yes, come into my trust fund of my audience that I have built for years of reciprocity, then you can go get the book at makeeverypodcastwantyou.com.
Perfect. I love it. And of course, the subtitle is How to Be So Radically Interesting That You'll Barely Keep from Interviewing Yourself.
Yep.
I love that. I love that. Well, Kimberly, this really has been so much fun. But like I said, I mean, I don't think we addressed any of our pre-questions. I mean, we've just been having such a great time chatting. But like we've been saying, that's what makes this interesting. And so when we say, oh my gosh, Kimberly's on again, people are going to say, oh, we have to listen. We have to listen. So we'll have you on again. But until then, do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave everyone with?
Build relationships of reciprocity and generosity in your business, and look at people not as a means to get something, but a way to give something. And then from that space, you will see your business 10x. So look at every person that you're interacting with, from your team members to the podcasters that the podcasts that you go on, to your clients, as how can you make this a 10x transformational relationship, and you will see your business skyrocket simultaneously.
Oh my gosh, I love it so much. I am Deb Creer. I've been having a great conversation about being on podcasts, or maybe having your own podcast, with Kimberly Spencer of Crown Yourself and Communication Queens. And until next time, everyone have a great day.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.